Hi, I'm Dan, this is at Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and this is the Royal Enfield Continental GT. But then you probably already knew that, didn't you? Because it's not a new bike and there are already plenty of videos about it on YouTube as it stands. So why stick with this one? Well, as you probably know, this channel is as much about the riding as it is the motorbikes. And Royal Enfield has kind of been there on this journey of mine from kind of wobbly rookie into hopefully slightly less wobbly proper motorcyclist, with the Interceptor 650 that I was riding all the way back in, well, March. Since then, I've covered quite a few more miles. I've ridden a lot more motorbikes, so I'm kind of interested to return to a kind of back to basics Royal Enfield and see how that new perspective changes my view of the bike. It's going to be quite a culture shock as well, because literally the last bike I was riding before this was a kind of bells and whistles, 28 grand, 170 horsepower Ducati Multistrada. So yeah, it's kind of back down to earth, isn't it? Anyway, no need to really labour the point about the Continental GT because, as I say, it's a known quantity already. But just to recap, it's based around the same steel frame as the Interceptor 650 that I know very well. It's got the same 648cc air-cooled parallel twin with its 47 horsepower, A2 licence friendly in that respect. It's got the same basic forks and twin shock rear suspension, but a slightly different configuration with these sort of cafe racer clip-ons and a slightly kind of sportier vibe. This one, as you see it, has the kind of the cast wheels and the blacked out engine and exhaust combination, which, although it perhaps doesn't look quite as retro as the Interceptor I was riding previously, as I was saying when I was riding that through the depths of winter, I think this is probably a slightly more appropriate configuration if this is a bike that you're going to daily or something like that. And it also gives it a slightly different kind of, more of a 70s vibe than sort of 50s and 60s rocker look of the Interceptor. Of course, if you want that, you can have the Continental GT with wire wheels and a polished tank and a single seat and things like that as well. Or you could do what many Royal Enfield owners do and customise it to make it into your own vision of the ultimate retro ride. Anyway, enough chat. The sun's kind of dropping, the roads are just about dry, so I think it's probably time to get riding. Okay, so straight from 28 grand's worth of all singing, all dancing Ducati Multistrada and back onto the very back to basics vibe of a Royal Enfield, in this case the Continental GT. And like I was saying in the intro, it's literally been quite the journey for me from the last time I was riding the Interceptor along this very road on a cold February day, very much the rookie rider, very wobbly, feeling a bit nervous on the kind of basic tyres and wet roads. And since then, I've literally covered all the miles. I've ridden a lot of different motorbikes. So, how has that perspective changed? What does that experience tell me about the riding experience of this Continental GT? Well, obviously the Interceptor is my kind of benchmark in a way, but more recently I was on that rather stunning Norton Commando, which in terms of its kind of cafe racer vibe is probably the closest to this bike. And I was quite interested, having enjoyed that Norton so much, how this bike would feel and whether it would just feel really cheap and basic and just a bit annoying. But actually, I'm quite pleasantly surprised. This 648cc Royal Enfield engine, sure it's not very powerful, 47 horsepower, it's not a lot, but it's enough, and it kind of matches the rest of the bike quite nicely. It's kind of, if you had any more it would kind of show up how basic that chassis is, but maybe it's because I'm on a super smooth road. This was resurfaced for the Tour de France a few years ago, so it's a lovely bit of tarmac. So the kind of inadequacies of the cheap suspension Royal Enfield uses on these bikes is probably less of a problem. And I've got to say, I'm enjoying the kind of sportier riding position of the Continental GT. Even if it's not a fast bike, it's just it puts you in that frame of mind. It's all about a headspace, isn't it, with a motorbike? And that's what this bike does. The riding position's definitely not as extreme as the Norton either, so although it's quite kind of nose down, bum up with the clip-ons, it's a lot more comfortable. You know, you could ride this every day, I think, and I found when I did the commute, the narrow bars are really good for filtering through traffic. Much better than a multi-strada in that respect. So, yeah, it's not as extreme as the Norton, but it has a bit of the same character, so that's rather nice. And if you want the more retro look with the spoke wheels and all the rest of it, you can have that as well. But I've got to say, if not what you'd call rude, the parallel twin certainly sounds a bit healthier than it did than I remember on the Interceptor anyway. There's a bit more of a kind of bark to it, a bit more breathiness from the exhaust. It sounds a bit closer to the shotgun I was riding not so long ago in that respect. And sure, the suspension is basic and you do feel it when the roads get a bit bumpier. But when you're just out for an evening blast like this, and at the speeds the bike encourages, it's kind of alright. And what I like about these Royal Enfields is that, although I've ridden some much faster and more high-tech bikes since I was on the Interceptor, I like the fact that they give you a grounding in how to ride a motorbike. You know, I mean, for sure, those other bikes I've been riding, they've had quick shifters, they've had rider modes, they've had cornering ABS, cornering traction, all that kind of stuff, but while it's great to have all that, I think riding a bike like this, a bit like riding a properly old bike, I like to think that it teaches you how to ride properly, you know, how to change gear properly, how to rev match, how to make allowances for the fact that you don't have a huge amount of grip or good suspension or powerful brakes, and just kind of ride within yourself and, yeah, ride properly. So in that respect, I kind of think the Interceptor equipped me with some skills that have proved very useful as I've been expanding my riding horizons and riding some fancier and faster bikes. So it's nice to get back on one, and I'm enjoying the experience. Although, having said that, maybe some heated grips would be nice after all. But you can't have everything, can you? So there we go, a nice ride out on the Royal Enfield Continental GT in the kind of late summer sunshine on nice dry roads. And I think, as much as anything, these riding conditions have put me in a much more positive frame of mind than perhaps when I first got on that Interceptor in the depths of February, when the roads were greasy. You know, I was just getting my head around the whole retro bike thing and the basic suspension, the sketchy tyres. I was a bit freaked out, I don't mind admitting it, but obviously since then I've covered a lot more miles, I've ridden a lot more bikes, and I think I've been able to kind of work around the limitations that you have with a bike like this and perhaps enjoy the character traits a little bit more. As I said on the onboard, what I really love about these bikes is the way they kind of connect you to the fundamentals of riding a motorbike, and as new bikes get more and more high-tech with more gizmos and electronics and things like that, they're great and I've enjoyed trying those out, but I think it's handy to have a kind of reminder of the basics of riding a motorbike and just how fun that can be without all the kind of the garnish of rider modes, quick shifters, all that kind of thing. In terms of how the Continental GT compares with the Interceptor, yeah, they're fundamentally the same, obviously, but I think I prefer the Continental GT slightly more sporty stance. You know, you've got things like the clip-on bars, a slightly different shape to the tank here. I don't know if I'm imagining things, but this one sounds a little bit ruder than the Interceptor as well. So yeah, I've enjoyed riding it a lot. Obviously, it's not as capable as the Norton I was riding not so long ago, but it does tap into a pretty similar vibe for a lot less money. And I think if, like a lot of Royal Enfield owners do, you took the option to maybe soup it up a little bit with some slightly better suspension, louder exhaust, something like that, you know, a few little customizing features, you could turn it into a pretty close approximation of the same spirit as the Norton, but for, as I say, a lot less money. So there we go. I hope you've enjoyed that video. If you have, make sure you hit like, subscribe if you haven't already. And for now, I'll say thanks for watching, goodbye, and ride safe.